even during the day, although it is online, and I hope you wouldn't mind attending during the, from your homes during the holiday. Nevertheless, so let's begin this again. So we have with us for the second talk by Dr. Dhriti. Yesterday also, as you would know, he had so Dr. Dhriti Ghosh is the head of the physics department here at IIT Bhilai, and he did his master's from the Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, his PhD from the Institute of Photonic Sciences in Barcelona in Spain, and he has had a vast research experience both here and abroad, where he was Ramanujam Fellow at Physical Laboratory in New Delhi. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Dresden Integrated Center for Applied Physics and Photonic Materials. And he was a postdoctoral fellow at the ICFO at the Institute of Photonic Sciences as well. His expertise is solar cells, and he is going to deliver this session on the perovskite solar cells, the future of photogenerated current. So with this, I would now like to hand over to Dr. Dhriti and kindly deliver this session.
Thank you, Mahavir, and good afternoon to all of you. Yeah, it's a national holiday today, and I hope most of you were able to attend this FTP. And happy Eid to all of you. And I also hope that most of you who are attending this talk today were also present yesterday to listen to my first talk, which was about physics of photovoltaics. There was another talk today in the first talk by Professor Sanjay Tiwari from PRSU, which was about optical modeling of organic devices, which is not very far away from what solar cells are. So I hope that you were able to listen to that particular talk as well. So I will continue more or less what at the same topic where we left yesterday, but I will be specifically talking about perovskite solar cells today, and I will tell you why why this new material, which is known as perovskite, is so fascinating, and why almost everyone everybody wants to work on this material, and I will tell you why this material is considered to be the future of solar cells, or the future of photogenerated current. Okay, so so this is the picture in the slide which you are now looking at, is an efficiency chart which is given at NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado, USA. So this is a national laboratory there, and which keeps track of all the efficiencies of different kind of solar cells, all the record efficiencies, not every efficiency, but all the record efficiencies. Okay, so as you can see here, in the y-axis is the cell efficiency, whereas in the x-axis is the year. Okay, it started somewhere around 1975 and it shows up to the current year. Fine, and you can see there are some color codes, right? So the purple colors are mainly for multi-junction cells, the blue colors are for crystalline silicon cells, the green colored ones are for thin film technologies, and the red ones are for the emerging photovoltaics, emerging PVs. Okay, so what we can see from here in this table, in this graph, is that let's take the crystalline silicon cell. Okay, the blue ones. So the research, I mean, it is from in this particular picture, the first point is somewhere around here in 1976 or somewhere around there, and the efficiency was around 13% or 13 or 14%. And now if you follow this blue curve, it has reached up to an efficiency of somewhere around, say, 26%, 26.7%. So I mean, if you have attended my last talk yesterday, I said, if you remember, that the first commercial silicon solar cell was around 1950s, right? So if I consider the time from 1950s, so from 1950 it was around 6%, and now in 2021 it is around 26%, right? So over a period of around 60 years, we see an improvement in efficiency of silicon solar cells starting from 6% to around 26% in the present day, right? So this is so similar. There are many other curves shown here for different kind of solar cells, right? One interesting thing is this multi-junction cells, which is the purple one, and you can see that efficiency somewhere is very close to 50%. In fact, it is around 47%, right? And you must be wondering, how come a solar cell of such high efficiency are made? Well, as the name itself suggests, it's multi-junction. Okay, multi-junction solar cell means there you have two different kinds of absorbing materials. I mean, if you remember from yesterday's talk, that for making a solar cell, we need a material which can convert photons to electrons and holes, right? And we said that that material has to be semiconductor, right? So it's a particular semiconductor has a particular band gap, and corresponding to that band gap, it will absorb light, right? Which also means that a particular semiconductor cannot absorb all the light which is coming from the sun. It will only absorb certain wavelength, right? Certain wavelength range. It cannot absorb from UV to infrared. It is a limitation of the material. So what happens in multi-junction solar cell is that you have two different kind of two or more. It can be three as well. It can be four as well, right? So you have two or more types of semiconductors which are on the top of each other, and they are joined so that each material absorbs different wavelength regime. Okay, and that's why the reason they have very high efficiency, and this is around 47%. And you will be very fascinated to know that these multi-junction solar cells are used in satellites these days. So whatever the satellites that are being pushed into the orbits, they all have this multi-junction solar cells, because at space we need more energy. Okay, fine. Now what I want you all to concentrate is this emerging photovoltaics, this red part, which is in the graph. It is on the lower hand right hand side, this part, right? And what you see is that if you see this empty red circles, which corresponds to dye-sensitized solar cells, its efficiency in 1990s was somewhere around around 5% or maybe, and now it has improved up to around 14% or 13%. Now take a look at a particular technology, which is this one, yellow colored field, this red balls, red circles, this one, right? And you see its efficiency was somewhere around around 13% in 2000 and say around 12, and now it has reached up to an efficiency close to 25.5%. Now this is very, very remarkable, right? If we just compare it with silicon technology, silicon took around 60 to 70 years to reach this efficiency. But this particular material, which if you check in the legend, it says perovskite cells. So this curve corresponds to perovskite solar cells, and which within a span of only a few years, its efficiency, record efficiencies, have reached very much similar to that of the silicon solar cell technology, right? Let's to view it clearly, what I do is let's zoom in. Okay, sorry, this should not be here. Okay, just zoom in. I'm zooming in, and you can see here. So this is your let me raise a button. Okay, so this is my perovskite solar cell, this yellow colored field, red circles, right? And as I said, it is the record efficiency at this moment is around 25.5%, right? There are other technologies as well, as you can see, this one as well, which is triangle, blue field triangle. And what is it? It is perovskite silicon tandem. What do we mean by tandem? Tandem is pretty much similar to multi-junction solar cells. Here, what they do is that they combine perovskite solar cell and silicon solar cell together, right, to absorb more part of the solar spectrum. So we are not concerned about the tandem solar cells as of now in today's talk. We will mainly concentrate on perovskite solar cells. Okay, but I would like you guys to please appreciate the fact that that within a span of only few maybe 8-9 years, its efficiency has improved tremendously, so that it is comparable to that of the silicon solar cell technology, right? Just to compare, with silicon, just take a look here. I have plotted only silicon and perovskite here. See, I mean, by looking at the slope of this graph only, you can imagine how good this material could be, that just within a few years' time, its efficiency has, has reached the level of the silicon solar cell technology. In fact, the first solar cell which was reported in perovskite solar cell was in 2009. Okay, and its efficiency was somewhere around 2.2%. Okay, so let me so the first perovskite, I always write perovskite as PVSC. Okay, the first perovskite was in 2009 and its efficiency was around 2.2%, right? So which is shown here, right? And right now in 2000, so this data is only for 2015, but in 2021 it is somewhere around here, right? So so from 2009 to 2021, which is around 11 years, right? Or 12 years. So in 12 years of time, from 2.2 to 25.5%. See, so this is a tremendous improvement in terms of the efficiency, and we will see today why and how this has been achieved, and why perovskite is said to be the future. Okay, great. Now let's compare with silicon and perovskite. Silicon is there for a long time, right? From 1950s, research has been going on. They are available in you can buy it from Amazon as well nowadays, right? So what are the advantages of silicon technology? The first advantage is the fact that it is very high efficiency, right? I mean, if you buy it from the market, you can get a module efficiency somewhere around 18 to 20%, which is considering that it's a solar cell, it's a pretty good efficiency. Okay, but of course, if you make solar cells in lab, you will get somewhere around 26%. Now, some of you must be asking or thinking why the module efficiency is different from the lab efficiency, right? Both of them are the same. Both of them are the silicon technology. Why they are different? Well, the thing is that when you make a solar cell in the lab and when you make a solar cell in a factory, there are differences, right? In lab, you do so many things, so many procedures that you are bound to get a little bit of better efficiency. But when you reproduce that result in a factory, a factory is has a different environment compared to that of the research laboratory, and that's the reason why the module efficiency is always lower compared to that of the lab efficiency. Okay, but anyways, 20% is a very good efficiency considering that it's a solar cell technology. What are the other advantages? It's very stable. So this silicon solar cell is very, very stable. Once you install it in your rooftop, for example, it will last more than 20 years. So actually it is more than 20 years, right? So once you invest some money, install it in your rooftop or anywhere, parking area or wherever you want, it will keep on giving you electricity at least minimum 20 years, maximum could be 30 to 35 years as well, right? And with the same efficiency. So it's very stable, right? It doesn't degrade. There could be rain, there could be UV light, there could be humidity, but it doesn't degrade over the period of the time. Fine. What is the third advantage? The third advantage is that the silicon technology is very mature technology. As you know that people are working on the silicon technology from 1950s, right? And therefore people have adapted themselves to this technology. Even though this technology was very costly in the beginning, but they had no other option. So what people then do is that they keep on working on the same material, which is silicon, and make it even more efficient, make it less expensive over the period of the time. And that's the reason why it has become a very mature technology as of now, right? Okay, but there are some disadvantages as well. And what are those? The first one is being the fact that it is costlier, right? Because the silicon technology and silicon solar cell has to be made in a clean room. I mean, there should not be any dust particle when you make the solar cell, silicon solar cell. So, so it's a bit costlier technology. Although people, there are many industries who are coming up, they are reduced down the cost, but still compared to other solar cell technologies, it is costlier technology. Okay. What is the other thing? They are thick and heavy. I mean, if you take a look at the solar cells, silicon solar cells, which are installed in rooftop or in parking lots or in street as a street light, what do you find? They are bulky, right? They are thick and they are very heavy. So although they are producing electricity, but they are not lightweight, right? So installing them, cleaning them is always an issue. The third disadvantage is that aesthetically they are not good. That's what I want to say, means it doesn't look good. I mean, aesthetically, if you want to install silicon solar cell on your rooftop, it doesn't look nice. It it has a stand, it's dark in color, aesthetically it is not so attractive. Okay, and what are the other disadvantage? It is non-flexible. What do we mean by non-flexible? Non-flexible means it's not mechanically flexible. I mean, you cannot bend it, right? So it has to be always flat. You cannot install solar cells on curved surfaces, right? So it always has to be flat surface. So that's the reason why silicon solar cell technology is not suitable for some of the applications where you need mechanical flexibility. You must have read or you must have heard that now solar cells are being installed in clothes, in backpacks, where you need a little bit of flexibility. But silicon solar cell unfortunately cannot be made flexible. So they are only good in the rooftops, on the parking areas, where the surface is flat. When we look at these advantages and disadvantages of silicon technology, let's compare it with perovskite. What are the advantages of perovskites then over silicon? Well, it's cheaper, it's inexpensive. Okay, the reason for its cheap is that the materials which are being used for making this perovskite solar cell are much abundant, okay, compared to silicon. And the process which we make use of to make this solar cell, these perovskite solar cells, are also inexpensive compared to silicon solar cell. As I said in the beginning, in the silicon solar cells, you need a very clean room, a very clean environment to make them. But for the perovskite solar cells, a normal room can be used for making the solar cells. It doesn't matter. Okay. What is the other thing? As I said, silicon solar cell has to be made in vacuum, or it needs a clean room. But these perovskite solar cells can be solution processed. Okay, and what do we mean by solution processed? Which means that they are in the form of liquids which can be spray coated, which could be spin coated, they could be inkjet printed, so and these technologies are very cheap cheap technologies, this coating techniques, right? So they can be coated like spray. Now spray are being used in everywhere in daily life. I mean, even now in our homes, there are some people who spray coated the paint, right? So that same spray coating technology can be used to make solar cells, and that's the reason why making solar cells of perovskite is much cheaper. Now I have showed here, I've included a video here which I took it from one of the companies which makes perovskite solar cells, to show you how perovskite are being deposited using inkjet printing. I hope that you have heard of this terminology, inkjet. You have heard of inkjet printers, right? You have heard of laser printers. So in inkjet printers, you have ink and it is sprayed over the paper to print whatever you want to print, right? Similar way, in this video, you will see that how inkjet technology is being used to produce perovskite solar cells. So let's play the video. So as you can see, the ink is being sprayed over this large substrate, and it is being heated. And as it's heated up, as you can see, this hexagonal shaped areas of with perovskite is being printed there. See, so this is a way of this could be one of the way to make perovskite solar cell, and it's very cheap, very inexpensive. Okay, what are the other advantages? Well, it could be the fact that the perovskite solar cell are flexible. So as you can see here, they are flexible. It is banded, right? What are the other advantage? So this is the first advantage. This is your second advantage. The third advantage is that it is flexible, right? What is the fourth? They can be made colorful. So if you remember what I said in the case of silicon, that silicon only has one shape and color, right? It is always bulky, it is heavy. But in the case of perovskite solar cell, they can be made of different colors. Okay, so you can install them in your windows, you can install them in places where you as a decorative stuff. So aesthetically they are very good, they look very nice. What is the fifth advantage? They are lightweight, they are not bulky. they are very thin, therefore it is very lightweight. Okay, so this is also one of the major advantage. What is the sixth advantage? It's mechanically flexible. As you can see, it can be bended, right? Okay, so with these advantages of a perovskite solar cell, you must have now understood that why people are running after this perovskite technology. Okay, now the question is whether they are as efficient as silicon, or whether they are as stable as silicon, because silicon has a very advantage that they are very stable, 20 years, right? And from the previous picture from NREL, we know that as far as efficiency is concerned, perovskites are on par with silicon technology. But the question is, are they stable enough? So we will see in our subsequent slides to answer this particular question. But we should remember that this is a very, very new material. 10 years time for a material to achieve an efficiency close to 26% is a very, very less time. Okay, to give you an example, the fact that nowadays you must have seen OLED TVs, right? Organic light emitting diode TVs. LG makes it. Even some of the mobile phones, the very costly ones, they come with OLED screen. When the first OLED came up, it was very, very costly. Of course, it is still costlier, but still, it has made inroads into the consumer technology right nowadays. But when the first OLED was made, it was only 2 minutes lifetime, which means after 2 minutes it degraded. It was not stable. Okay, it was not stable. But nowadays the TVs which comes with OLED technology, they have a lifetime of 10,000 hours. I mean, if you go and check any OLED TV, they will tell you that this has a lifetime of around 10,000 hours. So see, every technology takes time to get mature. You have to remember it. And 10 years in perovskite is not enough. So we need to give this material a little bit more time, so that although we are achieving on par efficiency with silicon, but if you want to really compare with silicon technology, we need to give this material a little bit of more time. Fine. Okay, so this is a picture which I was following in our in yesterday's lecture. So it was for the efficiency. On the left hand side we have the solar spectrum, on the right hand side we have the charge collection, and the total efficiency of the solar cell was is equal to the multiplication of different efficiency of different processes which takes place inside a solar cell, right? So I just wanted to recap a little bit of what we have learned yesterday, because it will be needed today itself. Okay, because the physics of silicon solar cell and the physics of perovskite solar cell is slightly different, not much. If you've understood what we learned yesterday, then it's very easy. Just a little bit of bit more new concepts will be there, but it's important to understand the working of silicon solar cell, because they were the first generation of solar cells. If you understand silicon, you can understand any other solar cell technology. Okay, great. Now, even yesterday, I told you that the efficiency of any solar cell, whether it's perovskite or silicon, is nothing but P output divided by P input, where the P output was VOC multiplied by JSC multiplied by field factor, right? VOC was your open circuit voltage, JSC is your short circuit current density, and FF was your field factor. Okay. Now, the thing which I wanted to discuss in this particular formula is that maybe some of you are thinking that what is JSC? Why not ISC, right? Well, JSC is nothing but your JSC is nothing but your current ISC divided by area. Okay, so it's not much different from current. So it is current density. Okay. Now the question is, what are the different factors on which this VOC, this JSC, and this field factor depends on? Okay, so the first parameter is your VOC, open circuit voltage. So what are the parameters on which this open circuit voltage will depend on? Well, if you remember correctly, what we said in our last lecture when we drawn the energy level diagram, this voltage depends upon the difference between the Fermi levels of the N and P type of the silicon, right? So this VOC, which means it's directly depending on the material which I'm using, the material which I'm using as an absorbing medium, right? So this VOC of any solar cell will depend upon which material I'm using for making the solar cell, right? Whether I'm using perovskite, whether I'm using silicon, whether I'm using organic, whether I'm using CIGS, that will depend only on the material. So the VOC is only dependent on the material itself, right? What are the other parameters? So next is the JSC, right? So this is the current being generated. What do you think could be the factors which affects this JSC? Now, JSC is nothing but the current being produced inside the solar cell, right? So, which means number of electrons and holes produced. So, first thing which you will depend upon is your light intensity, right? Which means during the noon time, when the sun intensity is higher, you will have higher current, right? But in the early morning or in the evening time, when the sunlight is of a lower intensity, you will have lower current, right? So it's pretty much straightforward that higher the light intensity, higher will be the current. Lower the light intensity, lower will be the current density, right? What are the other thing? The other thing is your IQE. This IQE is your internal quantum efficiency, okay? Which means, suppose I'm using perovskite as my absorbing material. So if 100, suppose for example 100 photons are coming, if my perovskite material can convert 90 out of those 100 to electrons and holes, then it has a quantum efficiency of 90%, right? So the current density will also depend upon the material. Not only the VOC depends upon the material, but the current density will also depend upon the material itself. As we know from yesterday that previously selenium was being used as a observing material, and then people later on found out that silicon is much better because silicon has higher quantum efficiency, which means it can convert more photons to electrons, okay? Then what are the other things which will depend on? It will depend upon absorption coefficient. Absorption coefficient. What is absorption coefficient? It means how much light a material can absorb. Some material can absorb more, some material can absorb less, right? So if a material is absorbing more, the chances that those absorbed photons will be converted to electrons are more. So it is directly proportional. So more the absorption coefficient, the more will be your JSC, right? And what are the other factors? Other factors could be your mobility. Okay, mobility. I will come to this mobility topic a little bit later again, but I hope that you understand what is mobility. It is denoted by mu, right? So it is physically how it is defined. It is defined as something, a quantity which determines how a charged species react when it is placed in an electric field, right? How fast it's moved. So when the electrons and holes are produced inside the material, how fast it reaches the electrodes is determined by the mobility factor. So mobility will also determine how much is your JSC, right? So there could be some more, but these are the major ones which are depends upon which determines your JSC. The third factor is your field factor. Okay. Now, if you remember the IV curve, how was my IV curve? The IV curve was something like this. This is your V, this is your I, and for solar cell it was something like this, right? We said this point to be your VOC and this point to be your JSC, right? And what was your fill factor? Fill factor was nothing but the the ratio of the two squares, something like. If you go back and check the slides, you will get to understand. So this fill factor depends upon two factors actually: R shunt and R series. Okay. Now you must be thinking, what is R shunt and R series? Well, to understand this, let's go back to this our equivalent circuit diagram of solar cells. So this is your equivalent circuit diagram of a solar cell, where you have a current source in parallel with the diode itself. So this is your illumination current, and this is your the diode current, right? So this is a very ideal case. Okay, this is a very ideal case. In general, there are always some resistances involved in the circuit, right? One resistance could be here. Okay, we call it R series, and one resistance could be in parallel to this diode. We call it R shunt. Okay, so this R series is the resistance which is being offered by different components of the solar cell, right? Like the wires, because you need to need wires to connect those solar cells. So these wires also have some resistances. So these are being contributed towards the series resistance. And what is this shunt resistance, RSH? These are the impurities in the solar cell. Okay, so it is shunting the solar cell. So it's shunting the solar cell. As you can see, the current being going from here, it will go through here, right? We don't want the so what do you think could be the ideally the factors? So what do we want? We want the R series to be, you know, as low as possible, ideally, ideal case. Whereas I want my R shunt to be as high as possible, because if your shunt resistance is lower value, then what happens is that whatever the current being produced inside the circuit, it will pass through the shunt. So in principle, if you want a very good working solar cells, you want the R shunt to be as high as possible and R series to be as low as possible. Now the question is, how can I calculate this R series and R shunt? Okay, well, you can calculate it from the IV curve itself. Let me draw the IV curve once more. It might be slightly bigger in shape. This is my I, this is my voltage, this is my IV curve. Okay, so you can calculate the series resistance and shunt resistance by taking a small triangular. Okay, and similarly you can take one more here. So you take you calculate the slope. This will give you R shunt, and this slope will give you R resistance. Okay, now because this is your I axis and this is your voltage axis, you can always calculate V by I is your series resistance, and here also you can calculate, right? So these values of this R series and R shunt, you can always calculate back from your IV curve. Okay, and whatever I said about the values, ideal case, you can always check it back here, right? Because ideally, how I want my this curve to be. Let me take a different color. So ideally, I want my solar cell to have something like a straight line here, something like this. I want something like this, right? But it always makes some angles, right? It always here also it makes some angle, right? So this deviation from the ideal behavior is because of the fact that there is always some shunt resistance and always some series resistance. Fine. Okay, good. So these are the two figures which I explained yesterday. I kept it here as well. I will not going to explain it here much here because we have already done it yesterday. But I just kept it here so that whenever you get the slides from Dr. Mahavir, we can go through it and understand how does the diode behave in dark and under illumination. The only difference is here. The difference is here and here and here. Okay, so this is in dark and this is under illumination. So I would request all of you to please go through these two slides to understand how does a diode behaves when it is kept in dark and when it is kept in a illumination. Okay. Okay. Now I also wanted to discuss about the movement of charges, because this is a concept which we require in perovskite solar cell. Okay. Now the question is, I said yesterday that we need semiconductor to make a solar cell, right? Because semiconductors are the materials which absorbs photons and converts them into electrons and holes, right? Insulator cannot do that, metals cannot do that, only the semiconductors can do that. And that's the reason why semiconductors are being used as a absorbing material in solar cells, right? The first thing which we learned about is the silicon solar cell, right, yesterday. And what did we say? That we do not need only a semiconductor, we need a p-n junction diode, right? If the semiconductor is the only requirement, so then only p-type material should be enough to make a solar cell. Then why we need a junction diode? Why do we need a p-n junction diode to make a solar cell? Why not only n and why not only p? Right? This could be a very this question should come in your mind as well. That why we need a p-n junction? Why not only n-type material? Take one n-type silicon material and shine light on it, and let's make electricity. Or let's take only p-type. Or let's forget about n and p-type. Let's take only intrinsic semiconductor of silicon, and let's make a solar cell out of it. But that will not work, and I will tell you why and how it works. Okay. Now, suppose, as you can see in this picture, it has a p-n junction diode, right? The Fermi levels are aligned. It is not biased, right? It is simply a p-n junction diode. Now, suppose light comes in here. It falls on the p sides, for example. So when light falls on the p side, what will happen? It will make electrons and holes. So the electrons which were in the valence band, it will be excited and will reach here, right? So this is your electron and this is your hole. So there will be many electrons, holes pair will be produced, right? When light is being absorbed. Now, is this enough for making solar cell? Making electron hole pairs is enough for solar cells? No. We want them to move in opposite direction. If the electrons stay wherever they are, it will not constitute a current. We need the electrons to move in one direction and the holes to move in one direction, right? To make electricity. Otherwise, there will be no electricity. So how can we make the electrons move? How can we make the holes move? We can make them move by having some electric field, and that electric field is being provided by this depletion region. We know that there is a electric field being produced, right? Negative side here and positive side here in the depletion region. So when these electrons which are now in the valence and the conduction band sees a positive side here, what happens is that it tries to move here, right? It goes here, it goes here and goes here, right? And suppose if the light is shining on this side, the same will happen here. It will also make electrons and hole pairs. So hole will be here and the electrons will be here, right? And when these holes sees, always remember one thing. Always remember one thing is that the electrons always wants to come down and the holes always wants to go up. The holes are like a hot air balloon. They always wants to go up, and the electrons are like a stone. They always wants to come down because of the gravity. So similarly, the same concept we can apply. So this electrons always wants to go down, so it is coming down because of the electric field. Similarly, the holes which are now here in the conduction in the valence band of the n-type, this will wants to go up. So what happening? Because of this electric field in the depletion region, you know, the electrons and holes are moving in the opposite direction. See? And when they are moving in the opposite direction, it constitutes a current. What you need is simply an electrode here, an electrode here, and connect it to a load. And you will see what you will see. You will see electricity. So that's the reason why you need a p-n junction diode. Only p or only n or only intrinsic semiconductor will not make a solar cell, right? So that's the reason why I was focusing on this movement of charges. So the charges has to move. They have to move towards the opposite direction, right? Towards the opposite electrodes. Okay, I hope it is clear to you. Now, if this is clear to you, let me introduce one more exciting concept, which is called excitons. Okay, so you have to remember this thing. We will come to this this particular movement of charges again. So we will need this concept. If you have not understood, let me know. Otherwise, I will go to the next topic, because we will need this one when I describe you know, perovskite solar cells. Okay, good. So this is now I'm coming into a new topic which is called excitons. So if I just Google exciton, what does it tell me? It tells me that you know the definition of an exciton is the fact that an exciton is in bound state of an electron hole which are attracted to each other by an electrostatic Coulombic force, right? Which means suppose this is a hole and this is an electron. So an exciton is a bound state, which means even if the holes and electrons are separated, as you can see, they are separated, but they are still bound to each other. They are not completely free, and they are bound to each other by an electrostatic Coulomb force, right? So we know that from our class 12 that the force between two charges is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2 by r square. This is your Coulombic force, right? So what happens in the case of exciton is the fact that exciton is a bound state of electron and hole. Although they are separate from each other, but they are not free to move away from each other. They are still, there is still some bonding between those particles, the electrons and the holes, and those bonding is because of the electrostatic Coulombic force. Okay, now in the case of silicon, or let's say let me start with organics. Now tell me one thing, when this formula for force between two charged species is for which medium? This is for vacuum, right? That's why we have this epsilon naught. If I want to calculate the force between two particles, this electron and hole, but in another medium, what will the formula? The formula will be the same, but there will be one other factor, which is 1 by 4 pi k epsilon naught q1 q2 by r square, right? This is for another medium. And what is k here is, if you remember from your class 12th, k is nothing but your dielectric constant, right? Some people also call it relative permittivity, if you remember, relative permittivity. Okay, so now in the case of organics, what happens is that the value of this k for organics is around, is less than 4, which means the value of k is very less in the case of organic materials, right? It means if k is less here, if your value of k here in this formula is of low value, the force will be higher because k and f are inversely proportional to each other, as can be seen from the formula. So in the case of organic materials, the force between this hole and electron is always higher. And why it is higher? Because organics have k values which are smaller in number, right? Now what happens in the case of silicon? In the case of silicon, the value of this k is somewhere around 11.7. So this is a slightly higher value. Okay, if k has higher value, what does it mean? If k has higher value in this formula, it simply means that my force will be smaller, right? If my force is smaller, it simply means that the electrons and holes, they are loosely bound to each other, right? So in the case of silicon, it will be loosely bound. Now what happens in the case of perovskite, PBSC? In the perovskites, the value of this k is around 12 to 18. So it has even higher values. So higher value of k means the force between electron and hole will be less, even less, and which also means that you need very little bit of energy just to make them separate, which can be provided by the room temperature itself. Okay, let me repeat myself because this concept is important, the concept of this exciton. Okay, so in the case of organics, when the organic material absorbs sunlight, it produces electrons and holes, right? That is fine. But because the organic have k values, very small values of k, those electrons and holes which are produced, they are not able to free to move away from each other. Okay, because they are bound to each other, because they have smaller k values. In the case of silicon, when silicon material absorbs sunlight, it also produces electrons and holes. But since they have K values of higher value, higher numbers, so the electrons and holes are free from each other because the force will be less, right? And in the case of perovskites, the K value is even higher, which simply means that whenever a perovskite material absorbs sunlight, the electrons and holes which are being produced inside that material, they are free to move. Okay, they are free to move. They are not bound to each other. Okay, good. So if this is okay with you all, I talk about transport layers then. Okay, so we first we understood why we need a field in the case of silicon solar cell to for the electrons and holes to move in the opposite direction. Then we understood the concept of excitons. An exciton is nothing but a bound state of electron and hole. And now we'll try to understand what are these transport layers and why they are needed. You know what I'm doing right now is that I'm making the background for perovskite solar cells. Once I am clear with these backgrounds, then I will introduce the perovskite solar cell. Okay, and why and these concepts will be needed there itself. Now, this is a figure which I showed to you yesterday as well. This is a silicon solar cell, the first one in the left hand side. Okay, and what do you see here? You see that there is some texturing being done here. This is your texturing, right? This is your texturing, and there are some silver grids. Silver, it is says fingers because it looks like fingers. So these are generally they are silver. Sometimes they also use aluminum. Okay, and then we have an emitter. Emitter is nothing but your N-type material here, and then you have a very thick layer of P-type. Okay, and then you have rear contact. Rear contact, it is the next the other electrode. It could be aluminum. Most of the time it's aluminum. Okay, now suppose light comes in from the top side, right? If light comes in here, what will happen? This N-type layer will absorb most of the light and it will produce electrons and holes. And in the junction between the two materials, N-type and P-type, it will form a depletion region. And once it forms a depletion region, what will happen? Those electrons and holes will move away from each other, right? Yes or no? So the hole will come downside, the hole, and the electron will go upside. So you see the holes are moving in this direction and the holes electrons are moving in the opposite direction. The electrons will be collected in this silver or aluminum fingers, whereas these holes which are produced will be collected here in the rear contact, which could be aluminum. And that's how a silicon solar cell works, right? So in silicon solar cell, you need a PN junction diode. And that's the reason why we have a PN junction diode here, right? Now, what happens in the case of perovskites, right? So perovskite is a material which is an intrinsic material. It's a semiconductor, no doubt, but it is intrinsic material. We cannot make it P-type or N-type. I mean, we can make it, but we don't want to make it. So this perovskite material, which you can see here, it is intrinsic. Okay, so this is intrinsic. Okay, this perovskite. So if you have understood the moment of charges, if there is no PN junction diode, which means there will be no field, and if there is no field, then the electrons and holes will not move away from each other, right? That's what we understood previously. So how can we separate out these electrons and holes? Suppose light comes in and it produces electrons on the valence band, conduction band, and it produces holes in the valence band, right? It absorbs light and it produces holes in the valence band and electrons on the conduction band. Now the question is, I want this electron and hole to move away from each other, right? They should be collected in the opposite sides. And how can I do that? One way is that I make a PN junction diode, but as I said, I don't want to do a junction diode here. It's an intrinsic material. It is not P-type or this is not N-type. It is pure semiconductor. Okay, so how can I move away this electron and hole away from each other? So of course I need a field. That field is provided by the depletion region in the silicon solar cell. But how can I make this field in the case of silicon, in the case of perovskite solar cell? Well, I can do that by choosing the electrodes. So in the case of silicon solar cell, what are the electrodes? This was one of the electrode, the rear contact, and these fingers were another contact, right? These are the electrodes which collects the electrons and holes. In the case of perovskite solar cells, what I do is that I choose my cathode and anode. Cathode and anode are nothing but my electrodes here, right? So I choose my cathode and anode in such a way that there is a finite difference between the energy levels. So as you can see, there is a finite difference. So it is more negative. Say it's more negative, and this is less negative. Okay, so as you can see, they are not in the same level. The cathode has this level and the anode has this level. So you can see there is a difference in energy, right? On the right hand side, I have this energy, on the left hand side, I have this energy. So whenever this electron, which is situated here, see a field here like this, what happens is that because there is a difference in energy, it creates an electric field. Okay, so the electron will be attracted towards like this. It will go here, and the hole will come here. Okay, had I chosen this anode and cathode of the same energy, of the same work function, then there will be no electric field. If there is no electric field, these electrons and holes will not move away from each other. Okay, now apart from this field which I created, using two electrodes of different work functions. So the cathode has a lower work function and anode has a higher work function. Okay, but what else you can see here? You can also see that I have put something called HTL on the left hand side and ETL on the right hand side. What does this thing means? Why not only perovskite and one electrode here and one electrode here? Why do we need another layer, HTL and ETL? Okay, so we will try to answer this question. So what is HTL? Your HTL is hole transporting layer. Okay, let me write it down. Your HTL is hole transporting layer, and similarly ETL is electron transporting layer. Okay, now please take a look at this perovskite material here, right? When this perovskite material absorbs sunlight, it produces electrons and holes, right? And to produce electricity inside the solar out of this solar cell, what we want is that we want the electrons to move towards the cathode. As you can see here, the electron is moving in this direction, and I want my hole to move in this direction. So they should be opposite to each other, right? And they are moving in the opposite direction because I chose my anode and cathode, which has a difference in work function, as I told you just a few minutes back. Now, what happens if the holes, instead of moving in this direction, also move in this direction? I mean, we don't want that, right? We don't want it. We want these holes to move only in this direction, and I want my electron to only move in this direction, right? To make sure that it happens, and it happens in a more efficient way, what I do is that I insert one more layer here on this side, and I insert one more layer on this side. On the left hand side, this is HTL, which is hole transporting layer. And what is the role of this HTL? The role of this HTL is to help the hole to move from the perovskite material to the anode, to help. Okay, and how it is helping it? It is like providing a ladder. It is providing a step. As you can see, this energy level, and this energy level, they are more or less the same. So for the hole to move from here to here, it's easier. Okay, similarly, for the electron which is on the conduction band of your perovskite material, for this hole to move from here to here, what I do is that I will insert one more ETL, which is electron transporting layer. So what is the role of this electron transporting layer? This electron transporting layer is kind of helping the electron to reach the cathode in a more efficient way. So first it will go from here to here, and then it go from here to here. Okay, So the role of these two layers is to help each other, right? Now, also, this material HTL not only helps to move the hole from the valence band to the anode, it also blocks the electron, which means if this electron somehow wants to come to the anode, since this has a band gap barrier is there, it will not allowed. Similarly, if this hole wants to go, instead of going on the left hand side, if it wants to go towards the cathode, you see it has a barrier. So this HTL layer not only helps the movement of holes, it also blocks electrons. And similarly, ETL, which is your electron transport layer, not only helps to transport the electrons, but it also blocks your holes. Okay, and because of this HTL and ETL layer, it makes the perovskite solar cell even more efficient. Even if you don't use this HTL and ETL, of course it will show some efficiency, but without including these two layers, the efficiency will be less. Okay, by introducing these two layers, you are improving your efficiency. Now with this I will also introduce the concept of transparent electrodes. Right now, what you see here is that on this figure, that this is an active layer. When I say active layer, it simply means that it is the absorbing medium. Okay, when light comes in, there are always two electrodes, one on the top and one on the bottom, right? And if the electrode and if both the electrodes are opaque, then what will happen? None of the light will be able to pass through it and reach the active medium, right? So we want at least one of the electrode to be transparent. Okay, in the case of silicon solar cell, as you can see, the electrode was not everywhere. The electrodes were in the form of bush bars or the fingers here. So there are some empty spaces in between where the light can enter. Right, these are the places where the light enters the silicon solar cell. But in the case of perovskite solar cell, we do not use fingers, we use a plain layer all over the material. So when I use a material all over the material, so at least one of the layers has to be transparent. So for a transparent electrode, okay, the transmittance should be as high as possible, the transmittance, and the conductivity or sigma should be also as high as possible. Okay, well, I introduced something called sheet resistance. How do I define the sheet resistance? Sheet resistance is denoted by RS and is defined by rho by T, where rho is nothing but your resistivity. Okay, so I want the electrode, the transparent electrode, to be as transparent as possible, and also at the same time I want the electrode to have very good conductivity, or in other words, I want my electrode to have as much low sheet resistance as possible. Okay. Oh, okay. There was a question from someone that what are the different materials being used as HTL and ETL? Well, there are extensive list of materials. Like for HTL, it could be P dot, could be molybdenum oxide, could be nickel oxide. So the list is extensive. There are many materials which can be used. Similarly, for the ETL, TiO2 is the most commonly used material. Then zinc oxide is also there. In organics, this is something called C60 is there. Then there is PCBM is there. So these are the name of different materials which can be used as an HTL and ETL. Okay. Okay. So for a perovskite solar cell to work on, I need at least one of the electrode to be as transparent as possible and as low sheet resistance as possible. Okay. Now, device architecture. Now in this picture, you can clearly see how does a perovskite solar cell looks like. Okay, so light is coming from the bottom side, and first we have the transparent electrode. So this one is your transparent electrode. Okay, then you have the whole transporting layer. So this is your HTL, and this is your perovskite material, PVSC. This is your ETL, and this is your the top electrode. Right, this is also electrode. Now the difference between these two architecture is the fact that In this case, the ETL was on the top and the HTL was on the bottom. Here is the opposite. Here HTL is on the top and ETL on the bottom. This is the only difference. And the direction of sunlight is the same, that it enters the solar cell through the transparent electrode, right? It cannot come from the top because the top one is opaque. The top one is a thick layer of metal. So therefore the light cannot enter the solar cell from this side. It will be reflected back. So the light is entering the solar cell from the bottom side where I have my transparent electrode. Now this architecture is called PIN, whereas this architecture is called NIP. Now I want you guys to understand what is NIP and what is PIN. Okay, so when I say PIN, it simply means that when sunlight first sees the HTL layer, which is a p-type material, okay, that's why it's P. Your PVSC is your intrinsic layer and ETL is your n-type layer. So PIN. Okay, so when sunlight sees the HTL layer first, which is the p-type layer, so it is called PIN. In this second case, as you can see here, the ETL is first, so this is n-type, this is your intrinsic layer, and this is your HTL, which is your P, so it is called NIP. So next time when you see some this abbreviation NIP or PIN, you should be able to understand that it's nothing but it tells you more about the device architecture. Where is my HTL? Whether first is HTL or the ETL layer. Okay. Okay. Let's come to now perovskite material itself. What makes this material so good? Okay. So the picture here shows you about the crystal structure of perovskite, as you can see here. So a perovskite has a general formula of A, B, X, 3. Any material which has this type of chemical structure, chemical formula, they are known as perovskites. Okay. As you can see here, the A, which is the blue one, this is your A. B is the grayish one, so these are the B, as you can see here. And X is the purple one, so these are the X. These are the sides of X. Okay, and it follows the formula of ABX3. Now, in the case of perovskites, which are being used to make solar cells, this A can be methylammonium, which has formula of this one, or ethylammonium, which is this formula, can be formaldinium, which has this formula, or it can be inorganic as well, like cesium. So A can be anything. Could be, as I said, this is your methylammonium. This is the most widely used one, widely used material. And it could be ethylammonium, it could be methylammonium, or even it could. So these are for the first three are organic, right? You can see carbon and hydrogen. So these are the first three are organic, while the fourth one, cesium, is inorganic. So so the A can be organic or can be inorganic. The B, which is a central metal cation, okay, most of the time it is lead, Pb, and recently people have also started to work on tin as well, but mostly predominantly it is lead. And what is X here? The X is halide anion. It could be iodine, it could be chlorine, it could be bromine. Okay, and so as you can see, there could be many combinations. I can have a combination of this one, and this one. I can have this one combined with this one and this one. So there could be many combinations, but not all the combinations are stable. Okay, so to see whether they will make stable perovskite solar cell or not, we have something called Goldsmith tolerance factor. Okay, and this is nothing but T equals to, it is denoted by T, and it's nothing but equals to radius of A. You know what is A, right? Radius of X, which is a halide, and this is the formula. On the bottom, on the denominator, we have this RB and RX. So if this value of this T is close to 1, then that combination of A, B, and X will make a structurally stable perovskite. The more you move away from 1, the more unstable will be the perovskite material. Okay, so this is known as Goldsmith tolerance factor. I also wrote down compositional engineering. What does it mean? It simply means that these perovskites are such a nice material that you can see that they have many combinations, right? There could be hundreds of combinations. You may find out some other material as well, which can be used as the central metal atom as well. So it has hundreds of combinations, which means that suppose if one combination is not working as a solar cell, then I always have a choice. To make another type of solar cell with different combination, right? Of course, it has to satisfy this Goldsmith tolerance factor. It should be as much close to 1, but you can appreciate the fact that it can have many combinations. So it gives me more chance to find a material, find a combination of this A, B, and X, which can give me, which can give me better efficient silicon perovskite solar cell, right? And that's the reason why this perovskite material is very popular with along with the researchers, because what does the researchers need? They want new materials every day. So by simply changing the composition of this material, they change the A. They come even in the A, they mix 2 different type of A's or 3 different kind of A's. They can have 2 different kind of have 3 or 2 different kind of halides. So there are thousands of compounds have 2 so it is thousands of compounds. So scope more, right? So people like can have an impact. Okay, so people like to okay.
Sir, your voice is breaking.
I'm not sure. Probably it is due to the connectivity. Okay. More opportunity lens. So
Hello, Dhriti, your voice is breaking actually. Now, just now. The video is fine.
I don't know. What is the reason?
Yeah, yes, videos will be uploaded. I'm not able to hear clearly.
Okay.
Your slides are still fine, but the voice is breaking.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it okay now?
The sound is
my side.
vibrating. Sound is vibrating.
Yeah, I don't know what's because it seems all fine here. So try speaking again, Dhriti. So I think it's becoming better.
Is it okay better now? I mean, I am having a stable internet connectivity. I don't know why it's like this. I'm sure.
Sir, you can reconnect. I think once a while you can reconnect.
Yeah, the internet connectivity is showing full strength here.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
Now it's fine.
It's better.
Now it's fine, sir. Now it's fine. Yeah.
It's better. It has become better now.
Is it because of the presentation mode? Probably. Do you think so?
Maybe, but your video is not on, so I think the sharing should be fine. I think.
Okay.
So now.
Yeah, it's fine now. It's clear now.
Okay. So let me try
everybody
once
agrees,
more.
right? You can hear everyone.
Or maybe I can go a bit slower then. Okay.
No, it's fine now, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
it's fine now.
Okay, so so this the picture on the slide right now shows you the number of publications in perovskite solar cells over the year. Okay, and as I told you, in 2009 was the first paper from Miyakasi where he showed an efficiency of 2.2%, right? And now see how much publications are coming out in this particular topic, which is perovskite solar cells over the years. So in 2009 it was a single paper, and then it starts to increase 7, 10, 16, 56, and then it's exponentially grown. So I included this slide just to let you know that how popular this material is, how important this material is, right? This material has changed the way people are thinking about the solar cells. Okay, so people are still working on it, and this is 2018 data, and in 2019, 2021 the numbers is even higher. So it is very much exponential. So it just to give you an idea about how popular this particular material is among the researchers. And also there are many companies which are coming up which are making perovskite solar cell itself for commercial values. Okay, now what are the advantage of one of the advantage which I already told you, that that it can have many combinations. So it allows chemical tinkering, right? You can change the composition of the perovskite by changing from lead to tin, or from ethylammonium to methylammonium, from methylammonium to cesium, or a combination of cesium and methylammonium. You have thousands of combinations, and when you have thousands of combinations, it gives you more opportunity, right? So two of the advantages I already told you. What is the third one? The third one is that high absorption coefficient, right? This terminology I already discussed in my last class. So what is absorption coefficient? And as you can see here, I have compared here with one perovskite layer with gallium arsenide and silicon solar cell, silicon. And as you can see that this perovskite has higher absorption coefficient compared to the other materials. When a material has a higher absorption coefficient, then it absorbs more light, and when it absorbs more light, the chances that those absorbed photons will be converted to electrons and holes are more, right? So this is a very good advantage to have when you have a high absorption coefficient. What is the other advantage? The other advantage is that band gap tunability. What does it mean? It simply means that by changing the x part, if you remember, the perovskite has A, B, X3, right? And X was it could be iodine, it could be bromine, it could be chlorine, right? And as you can see, by changing this X part, I can change the band gap. So if I have I, the band gap is 1.55. If I have Br, I have 2.3. If I have Cl, I could have 3 band gap. And if I make a combination of 50% of, say, I and 50% of, say, Br, I could have a band gap of something different values. So which means that this material gives me another opportunity to tune the band gap, right? Because the band gap is directly related to the solar cell performance, if you remember, right? Band gap tells you how much light will be absorbed, right? So how much portion of the solar cells solar spectrum reaching the Earth's surface will be absorbed by the solar cell. So this material gives me this opportunity to tune the band gap. So this is also one of the very major advantage. Now with this, I'm coming to diffusion length recombination, right? So what do we mean by diffusion length, right? So as I told you, if I have a semiconductor, once light comes in, what happens? The electrons will be excited to from your valence band to your conduction band, right? So electrons will reach here, but after some time they may combine again, right? This electron may rest again, come back to here. So this process is called recombination. So recombination is a process which we do not want in our solar cell, because if recombination is dominant, then my solar cell efficiency will be very less, right? So in principle, I want my recombination to be as low as possible. I don't want the electrons and holes to recombine again. I want them to be separate, always separate and moving in opposite direction. I don't want them to be recombined with each other. So for the good thing about perovskite material is that the fact that the recombination is very less in the case of perovskite. And with this, I come to a definition which is called diffusion length. Right? Okay, and how do we define diffusion length? This is the distance traveled by the electrons and holes before they recombine. Okay, so imagine a material, a semiconductor material, which absorbs solar light, and it after absorbing the light, it converts the photon, converts the electrons and holes, converts to electrons and holes. And since they are free, suppose that material is perovskite, that's semiconductor, and in perovskite they are free to move. So if they are free to move, they are moving inside the crystal, and they cover some distance, right? Say they cover some distance. So that particular distance which they cover before they recombine is known as diffusion length. So I can write it down, the length, or say the distance covered by the charges before they recombine. Okay, so this is a diffusion length. So what I want for my solar cell, I want my diffusion length. Suppose this is if I denote it by, say, for example, L, I want my L to be as high as possible, right? And my recombination, if I denote by recombination by R, I want my recombination to be as low as possible. I mean, it is very intuitive that if a material has a large diffusion length, of course it will have a lower recombination rate. Okay, somebody in the mail asked me, how can we calculate this diffusion length? Okay, so there is a formula actually to calculate the diffusion length. Suppose this this is LD, diffusion length. The formula for determining the diffusion length is something like this. It is equals to d tau. Okay, and what is d here? D here is diffusion coefficient. Okay, and how can we calculate this d? D can be calculated as d equals to mu kt by q. And what is mu here? Mu here is your mobility. Okay, if you can calculate mobility, it's very easy to calculate the mobility of any material by using Hall effect, if you remember from your class 12th. So from using Hall effect, you can calculate mobility. For mobility, you can calculate the d, and tau. Of course, tau you can also calculate. Tau can be calculated by using something called TRPL, which is time resolved photoluminescence. Okay, so once you determine the tau, once you determine the d, you can always calculate the diffusion length. Okay, so remember one thing, that you want your L to be as high as possible and recombination rate to be as low as possible. Okay, okay, so this is also one of the advantage of perovskite solar cell, that they have the value of LD in the case of perovskites is somewhere around in the region of 10 to 20 micron. Now, for a solar cell, this is a very huge number, and this is a very good number. Remember, if you want to compare with LD of, say, organic semiconductors, in the case of organic, it is around 10 to 20 nanometer. So it's a nanometer, and this is micron. So having a diffusion length of 10 to 20 micron is a very good number, and it is one of the major advantage of perovskite solar cell. Okay. Now we also have something called energy payback time, which is if you want a definition, so it is nothing but is the amount of time it takes for an energy system to generate the amount of energy equivalent to the amount that it took to produce the system. I know if you read the definition, it may be confusing to all of you, but in simple language, I mean, if you in layman's term, if you want to understand EPBT is the time, the larger this EPBT, the bad it is. For example, I can simply say that. Okay, let me compare. So this, for crystalline silicon solar cell, this energy payback time is somewhere around, say, 2.5 years, which means if you install crystalline silicon solar cell, say, in a factory or in a home, it will be profitable only after 2.5 years. Okay, whereas if you this P1 and P2 are your perovskite, two different type of perovskite, they have a lower energy payback time, say suppose after 2 or 3 months. So you will be in the profits only after 2 or 3 months. Okay, so this is how energy payback time is defined. Okay, larger the number, the worse it is. Lower the number, the good it is. And you can see that by direct comparison, it's in the years, and this is in the months. So this is also one of the major advantage of perovskite solar cells. But every good thing has some bad things associated with it, right? As we know from our life. Nobody is perfect, and similarly, perovskites are also not good in some respects. So one of the major disadvantage of perovskite solar cell is the fact that they are not stable. Remember, in the case of silicon solar cells, they have a lifetime of 20 years, right, which is very good. But in the case of perovskite solar cells, they have a lifetime of somewhere around 2 to 3 years. So it is not good. So nobody would like to install perovskite solar cell if it is only, if you have to change the perovskite, if you have to change the solar panel only after every 2 or 3 years, so it degrades very quickly, it is not good enough, and they have and to make it commercially viable, to make it commercially profitable, we want at least the perovskite solar cell to have at least 5 years of lifetime. But it is still not have done, and research is going on, and hopefully in the coming years we will be able to see something. Fabrication, how can we fabricate solar cells? This is something which I
Sir, why it degrades?
Okay, degrades is a mostly chemical form, chemical thing, because the perovskite material, this is a perovskite material, when it comes in contact with moisture or UV light, what happens is that it dissociates into different components itself. So it no longer remains perovskite, it becomes something else, and therefore it cannot absorb light anymore. Okay, so it's mostly chemical degradation, I would say. So whenever there is a temperature, whenever there is a UV light, whenever there is moisture, or whenever there is oxygen, this perovskite material degrades. Okay, so it's a chemical degradation. Okay, so how can we make perovskite solar cell? So this, whatever I'm showing it from my own lab. This is how we make solar cell in my own lab. So we start with FTO coated glass. What is FTO? FTO is your transparent electrode. Okay, then we deposit ETL. ETL is your electron transport layer. The most commonly used ETL is TiO2, titanium dioxide, and the picture here shows this is your TiO2. And how we deposit it? We deposit it using spin coating. I hope you understand what is spin coating, and this is a spin coater. Okay, the spin coating, you simply drop a material on the top of it, then you rotate it. Once you rotate it, it forms a thin film on the substrate, and then you dry it. Next thing is we need to deposit the perovskite layer. So these are the different solutions of perovskites. Again, this is being deposited using spin coating. After that, you deposit spirometad. What is spirometad? Spirometad is nothing but your HTL, which is your whole transporting layer. Okay, then this is also deposited via spin coating, and then at the end we deposit copper on the top. So copper is the next electrode, the last electrode. So, and it is deposited using thermal evaporator. Okay, so these are the solar cells which we made in our own physics lab. The real-time pictures here, and remember the sunlight comes from the bottom. It reaches the this active layer from the FTO side. So this is your N, this is your I, and this is your P. So this is a NIP structured solar cell. Okay, and this is the real-time picture from our own lab. Sometime you need also a glove box. Glove box is a place which has an inert atmosphere, and because this perovskite solar cell degrade very fast in atmosphere, so we need to deposit them inside a glove box, and this is the equipment which we use in our lab. And then to get the IV curve, because we need to characterize the solar cell, right? To characterize the solar cell, we use which is something called solar simulator. A solar simulator is nothing but it's a artificial sun. Okay, it's an artificial cell. We cannot take out our solar cell and measure the efficiency in the sunlight, right? Because every day the sunlight intensity is different. So we need a standard. So this solar simulator is an artificial sun inside the lab. And then there is something called quantum efficiency. We also have to measure the quantum efficiency. In quantum efficiency, your efficiency curve is something like this. You have lambda here, wavelength, and is your percentage, which is your quantum efficiency percentage, and it also something looks like this, which means it gives, what does the quantum efficiency tells you? The quantum efficiency tells you for each wavelength how much electrons are converted to how much photons are converted to electrons, okay, for each wavelength. So this tells you information about whether whether my perovskite material or any other material which I'm using it as a as a absorbing layer, whether it's absorbing in all the wavelength regime or it's only absorbing only on particular wavelength regime. So that's why we need this quantum efficiency measurement as well. And with this, I'm stopping it here. If you happen to visit sometime Raipur or Bhilai, you are all welcome to visit us. I will show you around how solar cells are made in real time inside the labs. You can also visit this website to know more about perovskite solar cells and how they are made inside a lab. And you can ask me some questions if you have any now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Hello.
Dhriti, for this really wonderful talk. Yeah, go ahead. Questions and discussion.
Okay, so this is Dr. Shobana Chakraborty. So thank you, sir, for a wonderful talk. And I want to ask something that is in the last graph that is still there on the screen. So would you call there's a kind of cutoff wavelength of frequency? Because it looks somewhat like that. So below a certain wavelength and above a certain wavelength, it would not be very efficient.
Yes, the reason is that a material which are using as an absorbing material cannot absorb all the light, all the wavelengths of the light. It can only absorb a certain regime of the wavelength, right? For example, the silicon can absorb from the visible light to a little bit from the IR light as well. But in the case of perovskite, it mainly absorbs the visible light. So it starts absorbing somewhere around here, which is around say 350 nanometer. And it goes up to say around 750 nanometer. So this is a wavelength of the light. It cannot absorb beyond 750 and less than 350 nanometer. It's just because of the fact that they have a certain they have a certain band gap.
So is that tunable? Can it be tuned, or is it like?
No, yes. If you remember, I told just a few slides back this that one of the advantage of this perovskite is that they can be tunable.
If you can change X, then the band gap can be changed.
Yes.
Okay, so but that will still be in that regime, right? So
yes, I mean
wavelength range.
For every corresponding band gap, you can calculate which regime it can absorb. I mean, I don't know whether you attended my yesterday's class or not. If you remember, if the band gap is equals to the E photon, it will start absorbing. As long as energy of the photon is higher than the band gap, it will absorb. If the energy of the photon is less than the band gap, it will not absorb. So that's exactly the same thing.
Okay. There is another thing I wanted to ask, another question. That is, you said that they degrade, the perovskite materials, they degrade very fast. That is the problem. So is it possible to have a kind of protective coating?
So this is something called encapsulation. Okay.
Yes, encapsulation.
Encapsulation. We generally do it. But the thing is that even if you do the encapsulation, it may improve the degradation process. It will slow down the degradation, but still it is degrades. So intrinsically, we have to improve the perovskite material by itself. If we can improve that, then of course with the help of encapsulation, we can improve the lifetime.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Sir, can you elaborate more on the band gap alignment? That how it controls the movement of electrons and holes?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, sir.
Let me find that slide, if possible. Okay, so it's already very much crowded slide. Okay, so the thing is that the material converts the photon to electron and hole, right? And to generate the electricity out of that material, they cannot move in the same direction. If electron and hole both move in the same direction, there will be no current in the external circuit. So to produce the electric current, we need to make the electrons and the holes move in the opposite direction. Okay, and somehow we have to force it. If it is not happening by itself, which happens in the case of PN junction diode in the silicon solar cell, but that is not happening in the perovskite solar cell. So we need to make them happen. And to make that happen, what we are doing is that we are choosing our electrodes, the anode and the cathode of different work function. this anode and the cathode are chosen in such a way that they create an electric field within the material itself. So as you can see here, it is here, the anode is here, and the cathode is here, and there is a difference in energy between these two, difference in work function, and this difference in work function creates a field within this device. So when an electron is produced inside the conduction band, it tries to move towards the cathode, and the hole will try to move towards the anode. Okay, this is
So
the physics behind it.
cathode conduction band, cathode, the work function must be greater than the work function of this perovskite.
Actually, it depends upon how you see the convention. The convention is that this is more negative, as I said, written here.
Yeah.
So suppose it is around minus 5.0. This can be around, say, minus 4.3. Okay. Generally, in myself, I always neglect the negative part. I always say that 5 is greater than 4.3. It's just the convention. Some people say minus 5. I only say 5. So for me, anode has a higher work function, 5, compared to a cathode. But it's up to you how you see it, whether you can see the negative sign or not.
What
the
about
main thing
the age of the perovskite?
What about what?
For example, the top band age of the perovskite is higher than the band age of the cathode. If
It can be higher, but as I told you, an electron is something like a stone. It always wants to come down. So it sees a step here. So it's easier for it to come down. It always wants to come down. It always wants to come down. I mean, another way, what you can do is you can try to find a cathode which has something like here. So that, and the conduction band of this ETL is something like, so it's smoother more here. So that's how engineering is done. You always need to find a better materials which can match the band gaps, match the bands. Yes, any other question?
Hello, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, one question I would also like to ask to you. I am here. Sir, I am audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Sir, is it possible to create the order vacancy compound in the perovskite solar cells, like is an inorganic photovoltaic material?
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Is it possible to create the order vacancy compound in the perovskite materials or perovskite solar cells?
I
Like
think no.
inorganic.
I think no. I never heard of this thing in perovskite. Always it's in the case of an inorganic.
Okay. Okay, sir. Actually, sir, during the modification of the inorganic semiconductor materials, which are using for the solar cell applications, then we can create the order vacancy compound also during the by some annealing process and other ion beam, low beam processing. So that's why my curiosity, we can create the order vacancy compound in that one or not?
Generally, we avoid annealing in the case of perovskite solar cells. So probably no. I would say no. It is not possible. Maybe possible, but we generally don't try to do that.
Okay, sir. Because somewhere I read it like if the order vacancy compound is there, then the more excitons will be generated in that compound.
Yeah, I mean there are research, some research is going on. How to improve all the physical aspects, and it's an everyday process. As you can see, as I told you, that in 10 years of time, it has improved the efficiency a lot. So research is going on. Even in our lab, we are trying to find more ways to improve the efficiency.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. You have shown that your practical, you have developed the whatever perovskite cells. That's very good, sir. Thank you very much for delivering the nice talk.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Dr. Vinithen from GD Goenka University. Sir, thank you for your nice talk. Sir, I have a question little different from this topic. Sir, what is the current prospect of dye-sensitized solar cell with ruthenium dyes?
The thing is, the DSSC, the field of DSSC has stagnated. Because of, Michael Grätzel started in early 90s, but, after a few years, say after 2010, people have stopped working on dye-sensitized. They all have moved towards the perovskites. So nobody works on dye-sensitized solar cell. Because that field has stagnated. Because the efficiency, there is no scope for improving the efficiency anymore. That's the reason why.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, any more questions? Any further questions?
Hello, my name is Naman Shukla from
Yes.
Shankar Shukla University.
Hi, Naman.
How we calculate the active area of perovskite solar cell? Is it different from silicon?
Sorry, can you repeat your question? How we calculate the active area?
Active area.
So, you know, the active area of any solar cell is nothing but the cross section between the anode and the cathode. How you pattern your FTO and how you put your top electrode, the cross sectional area between your anode and cathode will give you the active area of any electrode, any solar cell, whether it's a perovskite, whether it's a you know, silicon, or whether it's a organic solar cell. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Perovskite work on diffuse light or not?
Yes, of course. Of course. It will.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hello. Do we have more questions? Well, if not, then let's thank Dr. Dhriti once again for this really exciting and wonderful talk.